There's a certain kind of silence that lives in some childhood homes. Not the peaceful kind. The kind where you can feel the tension in the air before you even walk through the door. Where dinner is eaten quietly, where parents don't look at each other, where everyone pretends everything is fine. And somehow that pretending becomes the loudest thing in the room. Maybe you grew up in one of those homes. Maybe you're watching this because someone you love did. Because here is the strange thing about that silence. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A deliberate, painful, deeply human choice that an entire generation made over and over again to stay. Not because they didn't know things were bad, but because leaving felt like something that simply wasn't done.
To understand why boomers stayed, you have to understand the world that built them. Baby boomers were born between 1946 and 1964 into a post-war society that was desperately trying to feel normal again. After years of chaos and loss, the culture became obsessed with stability. The house, the job, the family, the marriage. These weren't just lifestyle choices. They were signals to the world that everything was okay, that order had been restored.
And marriage sat right at the center of that idea. It wasn't just a relationship, it was a structure, a social contract, a public declaration that you were a functioning, respectable member of society. Which meant that a failing marriage wasn't just a personal problem, it was a public failure. And that distinction matters more than almost anything else in this story. Think about what divorce looked like in the 1960s and 70s. It wasn't just paperwork, it was social death. Slow, humiliating, and very public. Divorced women were pitied or quietly judged. Divorced men were seen as failures who couldn't hold their family together. The neighbors noticed. The church noticed. The family noticed. And families back then had opinions. Loud, constant, guilt-saturated opinions. There was no quiet separation. No conscious uncoupling. No therapist helping you communicate your feelings. There was just the crushing weight of everyone around you knowing that your marriage had fallen apart, and the silent verdict that somehow it was your fault. So when a boomer looked at their miserable marriage and then looked at the alternative didn't look like freedom. It looked like shame. And human beings will endure an extraordinary amount of pain to avoid shame. That's not weakness. That's just how we're wired. Here's something that gets overlooked in these conversations. The vast majority of boomers grew up in households where religion wasn't background noise. It was the operating system. And nearly every major religion of that era delivered the same message about marriage. It is sacred, it is permanent, and leaving it is a sin. Not a mistake, not a difficult decision, a sin. So for millions of boomers, staying in a painful marriage wasn't just social survival. It was spiritual obligation. To leave was to fail God, fail your vows, fail the very foundation of your moral identity.
Think about how heavy that is. You're already miserable at home, and now the voice in your head, the one that sounds suspiciously like every authority figure you've ever had, is telling you that your misery is the righteous choice, that enduring it is what good people do, that staying, no matter what, is the proof of your character. So they stayed, and they called it strength. And sometimes, quietly, it destroyed them.
But this is where the story gets more complicated. Because for a huge number of boomer women specifically, staying wasn't just a social or spiritual decision. It was a financial one. In the 1960s and 70s, women couldn't open a bank account without their husband's permission in many parts of the world.
credit cards in their own name were a legal impossibility in many places until 1974. Most hadn't been encouraged to build careers. Many hadn't finished college. The entire financial architecture of their lives had been built around the assumption that marriage was permanent, because it had to be.
So leaving didn't just mean facing the neighbors and the church. It meant figuring out how to pay rent, feed children, and survive in an economy that had been specifically designed to make that as difficult as possible. And let's be honest, it often still is. The boomer woman who stayed in a bad marriage wasn't naive. She was often doing a very clear-eyed calculation about what her options actually were. And frequently, the math didn't work. And then there's the psychological piece, the one that ties everything together. Boomers were raised by the silent generation, people shaped by the Great Depression and World War II, people who had genuinely survived catastrophic hardship and emerged with a very specific philosophy. You don't talk about your feelings. You push through, you keep going. Therapy was for people who were crazy. Emotional vulnerability was, at best, self-indulgent, and at worst, dangerous. So the average boomer entered marriage with almost no tools for emotional communication. No language for saying, I am unhappy, and here is why. No framework for understanding that their own needs mattered. They'd been raised to suppress, to endure, to perform functionality even when falling apart inside, which meant that when the marriage started going wrong, and marriages always show early warning signs, most of them didn't have the vocabulary to name what was happening, let alone address it. The silence that started small grew into something they'd been living inside for so long, they stopped noticing it was there.
And, of course, the children. If there is one sentence that echoes across every generation of unhappy marriages, it is this: we're staying together for the kids. And boomers believed it, deeply, genuinely, with real love for their children. The thinking made a kind of surface-level sense. A two-parent home felt more stable. Divorce felt like a wound inflicted directly on the child. And so the suffering was reframed as sacrifice, as an act of love. But here's the irony that researchers began uncovering decades later.
Children raised in high-conflict, intact homes often showed more psychological damage than children whose parents had separated. Not because divorce is harmless, it isn't, but because children are not fooled by the silence. They feel the tension. They absorb the resentment. They grow up learning that love looks like endurance, that relationships mean suppression, that the normal state of a marriage is two people quietly tolerating each other. And then they carry that template into their own relationships. The staying, intended as protection, sometimes became the inheritance.
So why did boomers stay in marriages that were destroying them? Not because they were weak, not because they didn't know things were bad. They stayed because the world they lived in gave them almost nowhere else to go. The shame was real. The financial dependence was real. The spiritual weight was real. The emotional language they'd never been given was a real absence. And underneath all of it, the deepest, most human reason of all was fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of being alone. Fear of what it would mean about them if they walked away. Now, that fear isn't unique to boomers.
It lives in every generation, in every relationship that runs too long past its expiration date. The difference is that boomers faced it without the vocabulary, without the options, and without anyone telling them it was okay to leave. Some of them made peace with it. Some built something real from the wreckage. And some carried that silence all the way to the end, having never told a single person how heavy it actually was. Understanding that doesn't excuse the damage done to partners, to children, to themselves. But it does make it human. And maybe that's where real understanding always begins. Not with judgment, with context.